I'm going to tell you stories. And the reason I tell you stories is because that's how we as human beings work together. Because every one of us is unique. Every one of us bring our own unique gifts. In fact, everything in nature is unique. And this is why we tell stories, to make sense of reality. So the stories I'm going to tell you are going to be shaped by my life experiences. And I'm going to begin by telling you why I even called my nonprofit Climate Healers. Because healing is about reversing the disease. It's about making something whole, that which has been broken. So I was shocked when I saw Al Gore's presentation on TV in 2005. I was a systems engineer working on 10 gigabit Ethernet at that time. And I said to my wife, if half of what he's saying is true, what is everybody doing? They should all be working on this full time. So I said, I have to study this problem, and I'll let you know within 3 months what I should be doing in my life. And so within 3 months, I realized that it was far worse than what Mr. Gore had said. So I asked my wife permission to close down our company so that I can focus on this full time. And we did that. Then I wrote to Mr. Gore and I said, how can I help you? And he asked me to come and get trained by him as part of his climate project training. So I got trained by him in November of 2006. And I went around giving his presentation for 1 year, like I had promised I would do. And all along I had this dissatisfaction with the way we were framing climate change. Because there was something wrong. I like to use the analogy of a patient who goes to a doctor with a persistent mild fever and a lump the size of a coconut by the side of his head. The doctor examines him and he says that the lump is cancerous and it's causing you a fever. I'm going to prescribe you Tylenol so that as the lump grows, your fever does not go over 2 degrees Celsius. Would you as a patient at that point say, can you please make sure that as the lump grows, my temperature doesn't go over 1.5 degrees Celsius? Or would you say, can you take care of my problem? I don't want to have a fever. But that's exactly how our world leaders have been dealing with climate change for the last 30, 40 years. In 1992, after the Rio summit, there were 3 conventions formed at the UN. There were 3 major problems identified. The first was biodiversity loss. The second was ecosystems collapse. And the third was climate change. So they formed 3 conventions: the Convention on Biological Diversity, the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. How often do we ever hear about the first 2? But we keep track of the fever, the climate change. And we argue about whether to give the patient Tylenol or no Tylenol. But we are all complicit in this. Because one of the things that I found out in COP21 in Paris, one of the negotiators came out and spoke to me because I was wearing a t-shirt that caught her attention. And she said, nobody wants to talk about what you have on your t-shirt. She said, I was I'm one of the few women among the negotiators, and everybody in there eats meat. And the negotiators were told right from the outset not to mention the C word, consumption. So you wonder, why do we have this silence about something in our society? And anytime you have silence about something, you can be pretty sure that that's where the major problem is. Okay. You'll notice that the title of my talk is a little different from what was advertised, because I'm part of a group called Inspiring the Great Transition. And we are all determined, we are people from all over the world, and we have determined from now on we are going to keep talking about the Great Transition. Because there's a book by Jeremy Lent that came out recently, a philosopher, and he said that there are 3 possible futures for humanity at the moment. The first future is a complete civilizational collapse. And nobody works for a future like that. The second is what he calls a techno-split, where a few people have access to lots and lots of technology and all the resources of the planet, and the rest have next to nothing. It's an extreme inequality situation. And that is what our current system is headed towards. And the third is the great transition, the great transformation of values. You see, the UN identified 3 major environmental problems. And Gus Speth, who's the Dean of Environmental Studies at Yale University, he said recently that 30 years ago I thought that the 3 major environmental problems on Earth were ecosystems collapse, biodiversity loss, and climate change. And I thought with 30 years of good science, we can solve these problems. I was wrong. The 3 major environmental problems on Earth are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to solve these problems, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do this. It's up to us. I really think the faith community has to come together now to do this. So before I begin, can I ask you how many of you here are vegan? That's amazing. I think you are the highest density of vegans I've ever seen. I was in a school in Marrakesh where I asked 250 high school students, how many of you are vegan? And one child raised his hand. And I could tell that he had to raise his hand because everybody was looking at him. Then I asked them, so how many of you would deliberately hurt an innocent animal unnecessarily? Nobody raised their hands. Then I told them, by definition, all of you are vegan because you have compassion in your heart. So when it came time for me to work on climate healers, I'm a systems engineer, so I look at it from a systems perspective. So I was looking at the 3 major problems, and so where is the best place to go study these 3 major problems in one spot? So I went to this village in Rajasthan, India, which is on the edge of the Thar Desert. If you look, this is the satellite map of the world, and if you look, this desert starts at the western edge of Africa, goes all the way into India, and becomes the Thar Desert there. It goes all the way into China and becomes the Gobi Desert there. It is one contiguous desert. And if you know your history, right, you know that this is where the major civilizations of the world were. That's where Egyptian civilization, Babylonian civilization, Persian civilization, Indus Valley civilization, Chinese civilization, they were all in this region, and the desert happened. So I went to the edge of this, went to the Thar Desert to study, just to understand what was going on. there is a lot of social and cultural and health issues surrounding cooking. People have been doing this for 40 years, since 1970. The women who cook with wood live 8 years less than the men on average. It's the opposite of what you'd expect, because they're breathing in all that smoke. So that is the equivalent of breathing 2 packs of cigarettes a day in terms of lifespan. So we analyzed the smoke to see what was in there. And we discovered that the smoke was filled with industrial toxins from all our effluents. It had dioxin, it had furan, benzopyrene, you name it, it is there. Everything that we put up in the air comes down in the rain somewhere, and it's absorbed by trees. And trees are very good filters. This is nature's way of cleaning up our toxins. So the trees filter the toxins out, store them in their trunks and their branches, so that the water that's transpired from the leaf is as pure as possible. But these women were cutting those trees and burning them. And every year the concentration is increasing, so it's getting worse and worse and worse. So then it occurred to me, if it's in the trees, it should be in the vegetation as well. You see, the reason there is a lot of deforestation and desertification happening in this region is because the vegetation is eaten by livestock or farmed animals, and then we milk the farmed animals and sell the milk to the people in the city. So the biomass from the forest is now disappearing into the city, including the nutrients from the forest. Or we raise goats, and then we sell the goats to people in the city to eat. So the biomass from the forest is now, including the nutrients, is disappearing into the city. So over time, we are depleting the forest. When goats finish eating, they leave nothing behind because they even eat the roots. So it becomes a desert. So it was clear that, anything new is eaten by animals, our domestic animals, and anything old that is in the forest is being cut down and burnt for firewood. So the forest was being attacked from below and from above, and it was dying. So the people protected 250 acres of this forest. They put this stone fence to prevent animals from going inside, domestic animals from going inside. And in 4 years, it became that. Now, when I used to show these two pictures in my presentations, people would ask me, are you sure they didn't take the first picture during summer and the second picture during winter? Maybe they're fooling you. Maybe this is the way it is. So when I went to the village in 2008, December, I asked them, can you please show me this forest? I want to see it. Okay. So I took this picture of the fence. On the left, animals are allowed to graze, and I could see a lot of old cows walking around eating the grass. And on the right, animals are not allowed to graze, and I immediately went vegan. Because I realized I had been told a story that vegetarianism is just a little bit worse than veganism. So I thought maybe, I'm as good as I could be. I was a vegetarian at that point. But that's an accounting gimmick. Because to get milk out of cows, you have to keep impregnating the cows. And in India, we drink a lot of milk and we don't eat the beef. So the cows are all live for 25 years, eating up the forest. So I knew that my impact was worse than someone who's eating an omnivore diet. So I decided to go vegan on the spot. Now, the more I was in the villages working on these things, I realized that things are really bad. Things were getting worse and worse and worse. There are a few places where people are trying to protect some land, but it was being destroyed in other places because we keep growing our economy. That growth. So in 2009, I went to this sanctuary in the Coorg district of Karnataka. This was a sanctuary started by a couple from New Jersey. The husband is an Indian and from India, and the wife was an American. So they met in New Jersey, they got married, they went back to India and said, let's do something. So they bought this coffee plantation and they tore down the fences and gave it back to the animals. They let it go. And over time, these animals came and dropped seeds. The birds would come and drop seeds. The elephant would eat a whole jackfruit in the national forest and come and poop the jackfruit in their sanctuary. All the seeds would come out with the manure to create a new jackfruit tree. So over time, this sanctuary is now so dense. The underbrush is so thick, you can only walk where the elephants walked, because they are the ones who create paths in the forest. And at night, there was such a loud din of insects that I could barely hear my sister talk. So I asked them, what else did you have to do to make this happen? It was just the animals who did this? And Pamela said, no, we had to patrol the land and make sure that no human being comes inside. And at that point, I felt so small. I felt as if I don't belong on earth because I was born in this forest. So that was the story that we have been told, that we have been telling ourselves, that we don't belong in the forest. We have to get out of there. The civilized land is outside the forest. But we use the forest for our resources. The only reason why people could not be allowed inside the sanctuary was because they see every elephant as a $1,000 bill. Because that's what people want from the elephant. So I consider this great transition that's going to happen as the metamorphosis, the transformation of the caterpillar to the butterfly. And you can see the parallels. Because you see, caterpillar is a blind consumer. The first thing he does when he comes out of the egg is to eat the shell of the egg he came out of. Then he eats the leaf that the egg was on. And he keeps eating for the next 2 weeks. But when the caterpillar becomes too big for his skin, he stops, builds a cocoon around himself, and meditates for a week. And within the cocoon, magical transformation is beginning to happen. New cells are born called imaginal cells. At first, the caterpillar's immune system thinks these imaginal cells are foreign cells and tries to fight them. And then the imaginal cells become more and more numerous. And the immune system gives up. Then the imaginal cells start clumping together. They form different organs of the butterfly. And when the butterfly comes out, she's a very discriminating consumer. She only sips nectar from flowers. And in the process, she pollinates the flowers, she regenerates life, and she undoes the damage that happened in the caterpillar phase. And I believe that we are in exactly the same transformation. And I'll show you evidence why I believe that. Clearly, this is a spiritual and cultural transformation that has to happen. So in 2012, this is at the COP17 in Durban, South Africa, we wrote an interfaith declaration on climate change, and almost every faith leader there signed it, including Archbishop Desmond Tutu. You see his signature there. And we presented it to Christiana Figueres, who is the executive secretary of the UNFCCC. And the lady who's doing the presentation is Ela Gandhi, the granddaughter of Mahatma Gandhi. And in that declaration, we had this 2-sentence addendum, which basically says, well, climate change is a symptom, the fever that our earth has contracted. The underlying disease is the disconnection from creation that plagues human societies. And we, the undersigned, pledge to heal this disconnection by promoting and exemplifying compassion for all creation in all our actions. And everybody signed it, saying it is part of their faith. Compassion for all creation is the foundation of all faiths. Selflessness is the foundation of all faiths. And then a week later, I got a call from Archbishop Tutu's secretary saying Desmond is very concerned about what he signed. Did he sign on to go vegan? Because he loves his chicken too much. When what we say and what we do are not in alignment, we suffer. Not only do we suffer, we cause suffering to others. So then I had to look at the way climate change is being framed today to see if we can tell a story where we did belong exactly as we are all along as human beings. The way the story of climate change is told is that CO2 levels have been going up and down for the last 3 million years between the glacial period and the interglacial periods. And in the current interglacial period, the Holocene era, human beings came along, and over the last 150 years, we messed it all up. We caused a huge increase in CO2, which you can see in the record. The CO2 now is at 400 parts per million. And as a result, now temperature is trying to catch up. But every time the CO2 levels go up and down and the temperatures go up and down, there is a lot of suffering that happens as animals have to move, they have to shrink in population. And then in the interglacial period, they have a few thousand years where they can expand in population. So there is this shrinking and expanding that happens. So each one of these gyrations causes a lot of suffering. So I want to now show you what really happened in the Holocene era, an alternate interpretation of it. So I'm showing you now a graph of our human CO2 emissions from 1850 to present and the constituents of the CO2 emissions. So you can see it is caused by coal, oil, gas, cement, and land use. Land use is at the bottom. This is the deforestation and desertification that we do. And you will notice that at present, fossil fuels undoubtedly are the major contributors. 85% of it is coming from fossil fuel emissions. About 15% is coming from land use changes. But if you look to the left, you will notice that in 1850, land use change was the number one component of human-caused emissions. Now, it is not the CO2 that we're emitting today that matters. It's the CO2 that you've been emitting all along. You have to integrate it over time to see what is the major contributor of CO2 emissions from human contributions. So if you integrate it over time, from 1850 to present, you will see that land use change is the second highest, right behind coal. in terms of its total contribution. That is starting from 1850. But how long have we been deforesting? We have been deforesting for 10,000 years, not just since 1850. So Professor Radiman, University of Virginia, estimated that if you take into account all the land use change that human beings have done, then land use change is the number one contributor to human-caused CO2 emissions. In fact, it is greater than all other fossil fuel contributors combined. Now, this changes the story. He then looked at the ice core record and mapped out the CO2 in the atmosphere and the methane in the atmosphere for the last 10,000 years and compared it to previous interglacial period, that is the closest to our current interglacial period. So the previous interglacial period, it was going down like this, the CH4, and the CO2 was also going down like this. And in the current interglacial period, it matched the previous interglacial period until about 6,000 years ago, and then it deviated. So 6,000 years ago, it started going up, the CO2. And that's because of human deforestation. So in that sense, the world as we know it really did begin 6,000 years ago. Because we took over the atmospheric concentrations of gases as a species. So when you hear that holocene era has had a remarkably constant temperature over the last 10,000 years, it wasn't by accident, it was because human beings did it. It was our ancestors who did it by deforestation, unconsciously. I guess just like the elephant unconsciously contributes to the forest. So if you look at the temperature for the last 20,000 years, we came out of the glacial period and reached this interglacial period, and we were going to go back below glaciation threshold 5,000 years ago, except because of all the deforestation and the animal agriculture that we had started, we kept the temperature constant instead. The actual trend is up here. This is what we should have been expecting. So until the industrial era, we caused this increase in temperature of A. And after the industrial era, we caused this increase in temperature of B. And according to Radiman's calculations, A is greater than B. Of course, since 1850, we have caused a huge rise in temperature of about 1 degree Celsius. And if we just project that we will keep doing what we are doing forever and ever, and we burn all the fossil fuels we have on Earth, we're going to crank up the temperature to that point, and then we're all going to die off, and then the Earth will get back to the glacial period. So this is a projection assuming whatever we are doing now, we'll keep continuing to do forever. But human activities today, human economy is 60% larger than what the planet can support already. We are bigger than the skin that we are in. So why would we continue to grow? So we have to change the story at this point, transform from the caterpillar to the butterfly. But there is an explanation for what has happened so far. We kept the temperature constant for thousands of years through deforestation and through animal agriculture. And in the last 150 years, we have now created all the technology we need to maintain the temperature without deforestation. And now we have the ability to bring back the forests that we have destroyed. Because if you look at the global land carbon stock, The land carbon stock is high where the forests are, and it's low where the deserts are. And on land, there is 3 times as much carbon as in the atmosphere. So there is tremendous potential to sequester the carbon on land from the atmosphere. So you can see how the dense land carbon stock corresponds to the forests. This is the Amazon, this is the Congo, the 2 major tropical forests still left. But they're being eaten right now, as we speak, by our farmed animals. You can see the cows surrounding the Amazon, they're eating into it. You can see them surrounding the Congo. So as we expand our consumption of animal foods, more and more of these forests are being destroyed. And take a look at India. That's lacto-vegetarianism. Because India has about 600 million lacto-vegetarians. Okay. So now I want to give you an analogy of what is going on. Imagine that you're a weightlifter. You're lifting 5 times your weight above your head. You discover that you're on quicksand and you're sinking. Knowing that your weight alone is too much for the quicksand to bear, what is the first thing you should do? Drop the weight. So we know that 10,000 years ago to 100,000 years ago, the weight of all the wild animals, greater than 25 kgs in average weight, put together was 200 million metric tons. It's been fairly constant over the last 100,000 years. And human beings were a tiny little blip 10,000 years ago. But by 1970, the weight of human beings alone was equal to the weight of all the wild animals put together from 10,000 years ago. And on top of that, we were carrying twice as much in terms of weight of farmed animals. And the wild animals had decreased in weight by 60%. This is the total biomass I'm talking about. Then between 1970 and 2010, our population doubled. Our per capita consumption also doubled. So our overall impact on the planet quadrupled. And in those 40 years, 52% of all wild animals died in terms of weight. Now, if you take an exponential curve that is increasing by a factor of 4 in 40 years, and you extrapolate that out and say we're going to keep doing the same thing, how many years do we have left before we wipe them all off the face of the earth? And it turns out to be 16 years, by 2026. So when I made this calculation in 2014, this is from the World Wildlife Fund's Living Planet report, I was so shocked that I pledged to my granddaughter publicly that in 2026, when she is 16 years old, there will be more wild animals than when she was born in 2010. And I want to keep that pledge with all your help. We can do this. But that's not what the UN is planning to do. You see, I said that the weightlifter is lifting 5 times his weight. Our farmed animals weigh about 2.5 times our weight right now. But they are all young animals, and they eat twice as much as their weight alone would indicate, because we kill them as soon as they reach puberty or less. So they are eating 5 times as much food as we do. Okay? So, but according to the UN, their plan, according to the UN FAO, which is the Food and Agriculture Organization, the plan is to double livestock production by 2050. So by 2026, if we continue doing according to the UN plan, wild animals will disappear, our population will increase, and once wild animals disappear, our population will also start disappearing. Our necks are on the chopping block. Because we are now deploying high technology to go and catch the fish in the ocean. There aren't that many left. But the demand is still there, and the corporations have to meet the demand. So we have this artificial growth that we have created that causes this problem, But there is another UN organization called the UN Environmental Programme, UNEP, that is predicting that by 2050, the whole world will be vegan. But this is not a good plan. This is the techno-split plan. This is the caterpillar thinking that he will remain a caterpillar forever. And there is an artificial growth that's causing this to happen. The growth is by first pouring toxins into the environment, and those toxins then get bioconcentrated in the animal foods we eat, and then convincing people that the higher up you go in the economic ladder, the more animal foods you have to eat, so that you get sicker and sicker as you go up in the food chain, go up in the economic ladder. And then you get fixed with pharmaceuticals. And more than 1 billion people are employed doing this to us. So once you have this growth with 1 billion people or more employed, there is no government on earth that's going to say, let's stop it. Because of the system that we have created. The system is based on competition and consumption and growth. So it's a systemic problem. The system rewards those who are selfish and greedy. So that's how selfishness and greed have become so common among us. So to solve this, you really have to change the system. First, drop the weight. Then you will suddenly have all the resources you need to bring back the wild animals. Because 35% of the land area of the planet currently is used to just graze animals, our animals. And on that land, if we just return the original forest that used to exist in 1800, we can actually sequester 265 gigatons of carbon on just 41% of that land, which is more than the 240 gigatons of carbon we have added to the atmosphere since 1750. We can literally reverse climate change just by bringing back the forests that used to exist in 1800. And of course, once you have a new system in which equality is built in and sustainability is built in, population will automatically start declining. And so we will reach a balance eventually. So we are, in that sense, the thermostat species for the planet. Because we kept the temperature constant for the last 10,000 years, and we're going to bring it back and keep it constant so that there's no more ice ages.